good day, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We've got a very important, interesting topic for you today. It's called Fiber Health Management Made Easy. And usually, when you see the words fiber and health in the same sentence, they're talking about, like brand cereal or Metamucil or something like that. Actually, we're talking about the health of your fiber optic cable plant and how to make sure you can detect failures and degradations in an automated, easy manner. And please stay tuned for our poll question today. We'll have a little fun when we do that. Just a brief word about Ribbon. Ribbon is a global provider of optical and packet transport solutions along with converged communication software. And we provide solutions for service providers, enterprises, and critical infrastructure operators. Ribbon acquired the packet and optical portfolios with the merger with ECI Telecom that happened just in March of this year. So Ribbon now has a full portfolio of packet and optical solutions, customers around the world, very large deployments in India and Europe, for example. About 100,000 network elements, both on the packet and the optical side, deployed around the world. So we're happy to be ramping up our efforts in North America to help out folks with all kinds of networking problems. So today we're talking about fiber health management. And, sadly, we live in a tough world, and sometimes bad things happen to good people, and bad things happen to good cables as well. Interestingly, this is actually my first job out of college. I worked for a company called Bell Communications Research, or Bellcore, in New Jersey, and I had the honor of having the only database for fiber optic cable failures for North America. And so the way it worked, this was back in the days of paper. I would send out a questionnaire, and then people would fill out a form of the bad things that happen to their good cables. And there's just all kinds of stuff. There's backhoes, rodents, people who get bored and start shooting at cables, and they're actually fairly good shots out there. Of course, windstorms and lightning, and interestingly enough, a significant fraction of these things that go wrong are actually just humans taking a patch panel and putting it, patch cord and putting it in the wrong place, or bending a fiber, or doing something like that. So it was very interesting exposure to me coming out of college, that there's sort of the theoretical world of telecom, and then there's the real world of telecom where things like this happen. And when bad things happen to good cables, the damage actually can be very difficult to locate. I can remember reading some of these reports that I get back from the field, and you could tell that the poor person filling out the form was frustrated. They would describe some sort of fiber optic cable failure or fiber cut, and they would describe one guy, and I remember one report in particular, it's like, me and Earl were in a truck, and we were going back and forth, driving along the highway, back and forth, trying to find out where the shotgun blast had damaged the cable, but it wasn't really visible. And they spent hours doing that, and it was just tough. And we know customers still go through that sort of thing today. So damage can be hard to find. Is the failure a loose connector that's inside my building, or is it something in the outside plant that I've got to dispatch a truck and it's more difficult to possibly troubleshoot? We work with a lot of service providers, especially in the electric utility or co-op space, but this is true for everyone, where they own their own fiber in many cases, but they lease someone else's fiber for part of their network. And if there's a cut, but it's not always obvious who's responsible for the maintenance where that cut has occurred. So whose network is it in, whose property needs to be fixed. I told you the shotgun blast story, really hard to detect. And actually rodents are kind of an interesting problem as well. And if they're chewing through a cable, they'll typically damage, it's like they get full or something, and they don't want to eat anymore, and they eat half the fibers, and they damage a couple of fibers, and then a few of the fibers are just fine. So that's also got some tricky issues going on there. So when bad things happen to good cables, the damage is hard to find. the damage can actually require multiple truck rolls and hours to repair. Just recently, we've been talking to some of our customers, and they have a situation like this. They have to do a first truck roll because they don't really understand what type of equipment, they don't know where it's failed, and they're not exactly sure what type of equipment they will need to actually go fix the failure. So they send a couple folks out in a truck or one guy out in a truck, sort of finds the problem. He says, okay, now I need, a cherry picker versus, trenching equipment or whatever. Comes back and they send a second truck out to actually fix it. But we also know from many of these reports that I've seen over the years, lots of times the first fix isn't really the final fix. So you have to do a third roll to sort of really fix it on a more permanent basis. And actually there can be more truck rolls if third-party fiber is used because, maybe you send out two parties to go and find out, where the failure is. It's just a mess. So in these reports I used to receive, the average repair time for the temporary repair was 5 hours. The permanent repair was, this is the average repair time, by the way. And the thing had just a horrible distribution with really long tails. The average permanent repair time was over 14 hours, but, the long tail was, just ugly. So we're here to help you avoid the long tail. We can't stop a fiber cut, obviously, but we want to help you keep your customers happy and keep your cost of ownership and your operational costs down. So the way we do this, we have a solution, and the brand name is called LightPULSE, and we have an automated network OTDR that folks can use to actually manage the health of the fiber, find defects before they happen, things like that. And here are some of the attributes and benefits of the solution. We'll get into a little bit more of the technical details later. But first of all, you can deploy this in service alongside an already existing network. And in fact, it doesn't really matter what kind of existing network that happens to be. We've got customers who deploy this solution alongside a SONET network, really old-fashioned stuff, or a packet network, or even an optical network that's provided by a different vendor other than Ribbon. So it doesn't really matter. You can deploy it in service alongside an existing network. And you can find the easy failures very quickly. You will be able to instantly determine essentially where that failure has occurred along the fiber. And you can figure out if it's inside your building in a patch panel or if it's outside of the wilderness and you got to send somebody out. You can easily isolate failures to the correct network, whether it's your fiber or somebody else's fiber. And you can locate failures to actually within meters. In the electric utility space, there are some LTE-based solutions that sometimes folks use to kind of clamp on the transmission wire because the optical fiber is kind of bundled with the transmission line. And with those kinds of LTE solutions, they can detect a failure, but sometimes it's only to within a granularity of miles, maybe a mile or two. And that's maybe not the best way to go. So we can locate failures within meters. You eliminate a lot of these, extra truck rolls. You know right where it is. You know right what type of equipment you need to use. And more importantly, you can find degradations before failures occur. Sometimes, if there's you got a patch cord that's wiggling loose or a splice that's going bad, you want to be able to see that and see how that changes over time, threshold against that, so you get an alarm and say, wait, I need to go and look at this fiber at a convenient moment where it's not 2 o'clock in the morning and raining. Also importantly, you can automatically scan for failures on many fibers all at once, and you don't have to carry test sets to many different locations, and you can create long-term records of your fiber to determine, again, how it's changing over time. So here's just an example then of how you can find failure location to within meters and not miles. And you reduce your failure detection time by hours. With LightPULSE, it's an OTDR, an Optical Time Domain Reflectometer. Your accuracy of detection varies a little bit with the length of the span, but not dramatically. So you can see here this simple table. For spans that are less than 30 kilometers, you can find a defect within a couple of meters. If it's even greater than 145 kilometers, you can still find a defect within 10 meters. And if there's a giant hole in the ground, for example, you're probably gonna see it. And this is again in contrast with these kind of tap solutions that sometimes folks use on a transmission line, where you may only have a granularity that's on the order of a mile or, let's say, 1,500 meters. And please feel free to ask questions as well. We'll have a little bit of time to answer questions when we do a pause for our poll, and then we'll have time for Q&A afterwards. So this is just a simple case study. We have a customer we've had several customers now who are deploying LightPULSE OTDR. We have some customers with a fair amount of history on this. And after deploying the LightPULSE OTDR, they were able to reduce the amount of truck rolls they had in their network to literally hundreds of annual truck rolls without an automated OTDR solution. And they had about 4 times reduction in annual truck rolls once they went to this kind of solution. This network had 30 sites, roughly 1,000 route miles, and again, this mixture of fiber that was theirs and fiber that they were leveraging from other folks. So lots of benefits with using LightPULSE OTDR. Let's take a minute here and do our poll, and then we'll come back with some more details of the technology behind this.
All right. Thanks, Sam. I'm going to launch that poll now, and it should be coming on your screen. Please cast your vote for the joke whose punchline you would like to hear at the end of the webinar today. As you can see, there's four jokes here. Why aren't koalas considered bears? Number 2, a cement mixer in a prison bus crashed on the highway. What kind of people eat snails? And the last one, a man walks into a library and orders a hamburger. So that poll is open, and I'm not seeing too many. Here we go. Now responses are coming in. So please fill out which one you would like to hear towards the end, and we'll anxiously await the answer. Sam?
Okay, yeah, boy, the results are pouring in. Be careful how you vote. Some of these joke answers are kind of groaners. So, vote wisely, and it's election season in the U.S., so, vote wisely, vote often, I think is what folks say. And yes, there was a comment that came in from one of the audience members. Yeah, most of the damage that occurs is from dig-ups. And that's probably because most of the fiber has generally been in the ground nationwide. You run into entirely different failure modes if it's aerial. You run into things like lightning and trees and so forth. So different parts of the country actually will have very different types of things that go wrong.
Sam,
Okay.
we've had about 70% have voted. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll now.
Okay.
And I'm going to share the responses real quick so we can see our winner.
Yeah, you guys are going to be sorry. So, okay, well, we'll share the punchline at the end of today's webinar. Thank you for voting. So let's talk a little bit about an optical time domain reflectometer. Some folks are familiar with this technology. Some folks are less familiar. So this is just a quick review. An optical time domain reflectometer is kind of as the name implies. It's a piece of it's an optical function, and it injects light right down into the fiber, and it looks for reflections that come back from defects along the length of the fiber, and those defects in the length of the fiber cause reflection, and the time delay where you see that reflection, you can then go calculate the length. That's kind of how it works. It injects light into the end of the fiber, and it injects the light, this is really important, at a 1610 nanometer wavelength, so that it doesn't interfere with any kind of traffic that's usually operating at 1310 or in the 1550 nanometer range. That's how you can do this in service. It's light that is sort of out of band. As I mentioned, the fiber actually itself, connectors, splices, and cuts reflect some of the light back toward the source. Then you create a trace like this. So you could see, if you look at the power of the reflected light coming back, and this is the initial, let's say the initial connector right when I'm launching into the network. Okay, that's not a cut. I know what that is. And then you see fiber loss as it occurs over distance. That's kind of normal. Okay, this looks like a connector. That looks like a connector. That's a normal splice characteristic. This is bad. That's a fiber cut. You'll be able to find it quite easily. And the software that comes along with the solution says, aha, that's a cut. So a trace can be examined to easily find defects. LightPULSE record, software that goes with it records and archives the results, so you get a complete map of the characteristics of your fiber. So the benefit of this solution, one of the key benefits we touched on earlier was how it's essentially automated. The idea is you deploy the LightPULSE OTDR solution one time, and and we'll show you what this looks like in a more complicated network later, but this little black box here sort of represents the hardware that is the OTDR hardware itself. You deploy it actually in the network, and we can describe how that's done. And you can look at up to 8 fibers from that one instance of hardware. And and you leave it there, and then the software talks to the hardware and scans all the 8 fibers sort of on a periodic basis and creates those records for you. With a traditional OTDR, OTDRs have been around for a long time, but with traditional OTDRs, they used to be luggable, now they're handheld, and you carry them to every location, and you sort of tap into the fiber at that time, and you write down what happened. And if you don't have a convenient way of tapping into the fiber, that can actually disrupt the service. So the idea is you tap in sort of ahead of time in this other wavelength, deploy in the network, many fibers at once by remote command. It's a completely in-service operation, and you don't have to drive around to multiple locations. So the software that comes with this displays the results graphically and guides your troubleshooting. So it's one thing to get a trace like this here on the upper left that shows all the little bumpies and so forth as the light travels down the fiber. But what really needs to happen is it needs to correlate to actual geography. So we have ways of correlating that to maps, depending upon what kind of map you like to use. And then that way you can find out if it's your fiber or somebody else's fiber, and you can find out it's on the corner of 5th and Main, not on the corner of 6th and Main, and you can give actual instructions to your field folks who need to go out and fix something. So this is a little bit about the hardware. The Network OTDR hardware, it fits into an Apollo 9600 chassis. Apollo is Ribbon's brand name for its optical networking product line. So in the Apollo product line, we make ROADMs, we make small OTN networking appliances and OTN switches and things. This goes into, the OTDR function goes into Apollo 9600 chassis. That's our wavelength portfolio. And the good thing is, if that's all you want to do, and you already have a network, even if it's somebody else's network, just because you're buying an Apollo chassis and plugging an OTDR into it, you do not have to buy an Apollo ROADM. Now, if you need a ROADM, maybe you need it later. We'd be happy to help you with that, but please don't think that you have to, throw out your existing network and come in with a brand new Apollo network. This is an easy insert into your existing environment. The card itself is a half-sized slot in any Apollo 9600 shelf. This is like our medium-sized shelf. We have a smaller one. And the half-size slot basically takes up half the width of the shelf here. So it's a very small thing. If you can see what I'm holding, it's it's a little thicker than this book, but not much bigger. It's got a 40 dB optical dynamic range, and that means you can monitor spans that are up to, and this is a conservative number, roughly 160 kilometers long, depending on the loss of the fiber. Actually, if you have very low loss fiber, you could probably go a little bit further, but let's just say kind of 160 kilometer long spans. You can monitor up to 8 fibers at a time, or 4 fiber pairs, and we'll talk about different ways you can actually deploy this. You have daily, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly scanning options. It's in service of, as I mentioned, fiber monitoring, including historical measurements, and you can actually integrate it with mapping, and I forgot to mention this, with GIS functionality as well. So we have a GIS capability, so you actually get latitude and longitude information on the location of the cut. And there's a picture of that. So LightPULSE integrates with the geographical information system functionality that we have built, and it presents lat-long coordinates in the same LightPULSE window on the same graph, so you can get actual lat-long information and go to the correct place. So we get lots of questions then about how you deploy that hardware in different places so you can cover your whole network footprint. A frequent question we get is, do I have to put this OTDR hardware at every site, or can I just put it in a couple sites? And yes, you can sort of sprinkle it around your network judiciously to cover all your fiber with the most limited amount of hardware. So, and the way this works is there is actually, so in this particular hypothetical network, I'm showing, 4 OTDR devices, and it's managed from the LightPULSE software at the Network Management Center. And you can basically have a single connection into one OTDR, and then it'll use an in-band management channel to talk to the other ones. And let's look at this OTDR over here where I'm wiggling my cursor. This particular OTDR is going to look at maybe fibers in different directions. It's going to look at, let's say, the red fiber this way, and it's going to look at the green fiber in this direction, let's say. This OTDR would look at the green fiber in this direction, because this guy's looking at the red fiber in that direction, and so forth. And that way you can kind of judiciously figure out where you want to put the OTDR functionality. So here's a more complicated network that we actually modeled out for an electric utility customer of ours. This particular site and network had a total of 33 sites, and they had a total of 160 fiber miles. And as you can see here, the fiber was quite a crazy patchwork. So we kind of helped them figure out where the best place to put these things are, and we wound up placing 3 locations had OTDR hardware, so one here, one by this black box here, one with this black box here. And the other locations, all you had to have was a filter. The filter is a way to couple that 1610 nanometer OTDR light over the fiber alongside the other services. So these other sites have filters, but only 3 sites had the OTDR gear. And then the fiber could be managed. So for example, let's look at the yellow line here. The yellow line is a pair of fibers that runs from this OTDR location all the way over to this OTDR location. And the way it works is this fiber, this OTDR location shoots light in this direction and looks for reflections. So this fellow will receive a report on what's happening with the single fiber that's going this way. And at this end, this OTDR will launch light this way down the other fiber and get reflections back, and he'll be able to report on things that happen this way. Generally speaking, if you're using fiber pairs between sites, generally speaking, you will want to look at that span from both sides so you can see if something just happens to one fiber or another fiber. The solution is very economically priced. This is just sort of a ballpark budgetary price to give you a feel of how much this particular installation cost, including the software. This is budgetary, and it's kind of a one-time only price. It's no, obviously if there are volumes and you've got something going on, give us a call. But roughly 130 grand or 128 grand to fully manage a relatively good-sized fiber network like this. Good, and I see we're getting some nice questions in here, and we'll hit those during the Q&A, and I'll have Mr. Grad to help me with some of the details. Okay, coming down to the end, we'll probably give you some time back this morning. So this just kind of summarizes, the traditional options for maintaining your fiber health. The LightPULSE OTDRs here in this column, the transmission line tap that I talked about that are often used by electric utilities is here. Handheld option that we talked about earlier is here. And actually there's another option called a pluggable option. This is where, technology is advancing. So now you can take an OTDR in a limited capability and put it right on a pluggable, like an XFP pluggable it is, and put that right in a shelf. That is something that can be done, but it's much more limited. It's limited in detection range. It doesn't have the software behind it generally to do GIS mapping or historical or in-service. It's generally not an in-service operation. So if you look at all these things that you kind of want in your fiber health management solution, it's really the LightPULSE OTDR solution that shines far above these other ones in pretty much every area, in most areas, let's say. So in summary, before we hit the Q&A, oh, and the joke, and we have to have the punchline too, proactive fiber health management with LightPULSE Automated Network OTDR reduces the number of truck rolls, the repair time. It'll lower your cost of ownership. It'll improve your customer satisfaction. It finds defects very precisely. It will help you spot trouble before it happens so you don't have to blow up the entire golf course. It runs automatically in the background, gives you simple graphical results, and it doesn't require a ribbon, packet, or optical network. Okay? Hope that made sense. Happy to answer your questions, but maybe before we do, let's get to the joke punchline. I kind of told you all you were going to regret it. Bruno, there was a tragic accident. A cement mixer had a collision with a prison bus. You know what happened? The police ran around warning people to look out for hardened criminals. I'm so sorry.
I'm laughing, Sam. I'm laughing.
Okay, good. Anyway, so thank you for your attention. So let's look at some of the questions that came in. Maybe I'll take the first one here. It says, do you have statistics on the percent of failures by reason, how much rodent shotgun, et cetera? Yes, if you joined late, one of the first slides we gave up front were some statistics. They're sort of old, but this is an area that hasn't changed much, so they're probably still pretty darn valid. Where we have that all broken down. I think we're going to send out a PDF to interested folks after the session, so you'll see that broken down. Okay. Bruno, do you want to take one of those other questions?
Already, most of them been answered.
Yeah, there's a pricing question, and we probably prefer to answer the pricing question out loud offline. I'm not really a fair pricing guy, but we can come back to you with the information about kind of the pricing structure and how it works. I think this is an interesting one. How does the solution perform with CWDM or DWDM networks? You see that one, Bruno? Currently utilizing the 1610 nanometer wavelength. Is your wavelength configurable?
Yeah, so the wavelength as it stands today is not configurable. On the DWDM network, in most cases, the 1610 is outside of the ITU grid, so that's non-relevant. In CWDM, the filter that we have is enough to provide about 30 dB separation from the closest lambda, so no issue really.
Okay, great. So, and there's another question that says, is the GAS mapping a cloud-based solution, or does it sit on the individual hardware boxes? Bruno, you want to describe kind of the GIS mapping capability that we offer?
Absolutely. So we use GIS solutions similar to Google Maps and others. The information that we have is usually downloaded for a background map, and then each one of those locations the fiber run along those locations has the GIS coordination. Now, you can download the information from a web base, but that information is actually going to sit on the system that actually provides the LightPULSE. So it locally doesn't have to put information all the time, because that shouldn't change since the fiber, wherever it's running, is supposed to be static.
Okay, and here's an interesting question. It says, how does your OTDR see through network elements as shown in the diagram? Let me go back to the diagram just so everybody can see this. There we go. Fortunately, it doesn't actually have to go see through a network element. We kind of couple around it. Bruno, do you want to describe that?
Sure, absolutely. So as we mentioned, once you have the 1610 running through your system, wherever you get to a non-OTDR element, we actually filter it out and filter it back in. So we kind of bridge over the network element The network element drops the regular traffic that can be, DWDM, CWDM, or simple, non-specific wavelength Ethernet, and the OTDR just jump over and back, and you can actually going to see in your OTDR backtrace a little blip coming in and out, so you actually see all the way to the filter, through the filter, and the backside of the filter. So even if there's a connection problem in the filter, you're actually going to be able to see that.
Okay, great. That was a good question. And there's a question about, will this work with the MapCon database? Bruno, can I throw that one at you as well?
Right. So at this point, we didn't actually have experience with the MapCon, but since GIS coordinates, and as I mentioned before, the coordinates are kind of static sitting with the background map inside the LightPULSE, any kind of database can be translated or migrated to just provide the right coordinates, and then at that point, it's trivial what database he uses. So we have different utilities that are using different type of databases to mark where, for instance, their power poles are, because they're running the fiber over the power poles. So we can adapt to whatever kind of coordinate system you have and provide that information within the system.
Okay. Oh, good questions coming in. Okay, so here's another one. Is the solution passive or active in the network? In other words, if the OTDR part fails, does it impact traffic? And the answer is absolutely not. The OTDR sort of sits outside the network, couples light into the network, and if something happens in the OTDR card that dies, that's a sad moment, but it doesn't affect your traffic. And then another question then on the sampling rate of the OTDR reading, can I get it on an hourly basis? Yeah, I think we can do hourly, daily, and so forth, right, Bruno?
Yeah, so there's an automatic setting, and then there's a manual setting. So you can run it multiple times and compare it to previous records. We usually run a birth certificate once it's there. You can even set thresholds for major changes. So if you're, any kind of trace change by more than 3 dB, we can raise a flag. So you can, especially after a fix, usually you run multiple traces manually again, just in order to make sure that whatever was fixed right.
Well, good. Some great questions today. Really appreciate it, everyone. I think that's probably all the content we have, and we'd be happy to give you some time back.
Thanks, Sam and Bruno and everyone for attending today. We had a couple questions about the slides, so absolutely. Later on this afternoon, there'll be an email coming to you with a link to the replay, the recording of today's session, as well as a link to those slides. So look out for that coming a little later. And if other questions come up later on after maybe you review the replay, you can always reach out to us simply by going to ribbоncommunications.com. Plenty of opportunities there to hit a contact us button. And we'll make sure those questions get routed to Sam or Bruno or whomever needs. So again, thank you all for your time. Look for that email later today, and we appreciate your participation. A quick survey is going to pop up at the end, like I mentioned, regarding future webinar topics. So we'd love to hear from you there as well. That's all that I have. Any parting words, Sam?
No, thank you again for joining, and please feel free to contact any of us if you have questions.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, take care.